The Young and the Restless spoilers. Monday, July 28, 2025. The air inside the mountain retreat felt thick with dread, the kind that seeped into the walls and clung to every breath. Nick Newman lay on the makeshift cot in a storage room repurposed in haste, his skin pale and clammy, his abdomen wrapped in blood-soaked fabric that was doing little to stop the internal damage. Time wasn't on his side, and everyone in the room knew it. Sharon stayed at his side, holding his hand tightly, whispering softly with a desperate kind of hope, while Sally Spectra paced nearby, trying to remember everything she had once learned about field triage back in her Carney days. She wasn't a medic. She had never claimed to be. But she had seen enough injuries and chaos to recognize that Nick didn't have hours, he had minutes. When Billy Abbott burst in with supplies he had scavenged from the lodge's basement, Sally didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside Nick, hands moving with urgency she hadn't felt in years. Sharon backed away only slightly, just enough to let her work, but she never let go of Nick's other hand. He was slipping, and if they didn't stabilize him soon, they were going to lose him. Sally forced herself to ignore the shaking in her fingers as she cut away the makeshift dressing, revealing the deep wound across Nick's lower stomach. She exhaled sharply but didn't look away. Billy was right. She'd done this before, in dirty tents and beneath stadium bleachers, when lives depended on duct tape, whiskey, and sheer determination. This wasn't that different. Just more personal. Meanwhile, in a dark room hidden behind the northern corridor of the estate, Victor Newman and Chance Chancellor stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the listening device crackling with live audio. They had found it earlier, one of Carter's final contingencies, a tapped line meant to monitor conversations. Now, it served a different purpose. It gave them ears inside Cain Ashby's private study. They listened as Cain spoke to an unknown third party, his voice calm, rehearsed, and disturbingly confident. He spoke of how Nick's arrest had turned public opinion, how Chancellor's shares were dipping in confusion, and how leverage could shift entirely if Nikki Newman folded under pressure. Victor's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he exchanged a glance with Chance. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real. Cain was playing a power game, using blood, chaos, and manipulation to destabilize Chancellor Industries, and Nick was just a pawn. Chance, his voice low and filled with disgust, whispered that they needed to act fast before Nikki made a decision she couldn't take back. Across the estate, Nikki Newman was already a few steps ahead. She had met with Lauren Fenmore in one of the side salons, and the conversation had quickly grown intense. Nikki confessed that she believed Nick's arrest, the chaos around his injury, and the mysterious events unfolding weren't isolated incidents, they were part of Cain's larger plan to seize control. She knew Cain didn't care about legacy or justice. He cared about leverage, about tipping the board until everyone bent to his terms. Lauren, incredulous, asked if Nikki was seriously considering giving in, sacrificing Chancellor Industries to buy Nick's safety. Nikki didn't flinch. If it meant protecting her son, she would burn the whole company down. Lauren tried to reason with her, insisting they could find another way. But Nikki had already made her calculations. In her mind, Nick's life was non-negotiable. She wouldn't lose another son. Not to this war. Back in the makeshift medical room, Sally worked with a focus that drowned out the world. She was improvising stitches using fishing line, her hands slick with blood, her voice steady as she gave Sharon instructions. Nick moaned, drifting in and out, his body reacting to the trauma, the fever, the sheer exhaustion. Sharon whispered stories to keep him grounded. She told him about the first time Noah rode a bike, about Summer's tantrums, about Faith's obsession with animals. She spoke of Christian and the time Nick made pancakes in the shape of stars. She reminded him who he was as father, brother, protector. Nick's grip tightened faintly, and Sally took that as a sign to keep going. Billy re-entered the room after a brief absence, having spoken again with Victor. He pulled Sally aside just long enough to tell her that if she hadn't stepped in, Nick would be dead already. She tried to dismiss it, saying she wasn't a doctor, wasn't trained, but Billy wouldn't let her diminish what she had done. He reminded her of the carny life, the broken bones, the knife wounds, the nights where no ambulance came. Sally didn't need credentials to save someone. She just needed heart, and she had more of that than anyone he'd ever known. He urged her to stay with Nick, because whether she believed it or not, Nick needed her more than anyone right now. Later, when Sharon stepped into the hallway to speak with Billy, she asked him what his next move would be. Billy replied that if their current plan didn't work, he'd go down the mountain himself and get help the old-fashioned way. Sharon nodded, trying to keep hope in her voice as she reassured him that they would find a way. When she returned to Nick's side, she picked up where she left off, memories, soft laughter, stories that kept the light alive in his eyes. Outside, the estate was growing colder. Storm clouds rolled over the French hills like omens. Victor and Chance regrouped with Lauren and Nikki, quietly planning their next steps. Nikki remained adamant she would trade everything to save her son. But Victor, now armed with the knowledge of Cain's treachery, was no longer willing to bargain. He wanted justice. He wanted Cain to answer for every lie, every move. And he would take him down the only way Victor Newman knew how, with power. But the war was far from over. Let me know if you'd like to continue the next part, Nick's recovery, Victor confronting Cain directly, or Amanda preparing legal charges. I can also expand Sally and Sharon's emotional bond or detail Billy's risk-filled plan to escape the estate for help. The quiet hum of the train cutting through the French countryside was at odds with the chaos unfolding in its cramped sleeping compartments. Inside the narrow cabin where Nick Newman lay half-conscious, the atmosphere was thick with blood, steam, and desperation. Sally Spectra's hands were trembling, but her eyes were locked in place, focused on the torn flesh at Nick's waist. There was no time to hesitate, no space to doubt. Billy stood over her, sweat glistening at his temples as he placed an old leather satchel of emergency supplies beside her. He had said only one thing before disappearing to search for help: give her a chance. It wasn't just a plea, it was a belief. Sally could save him. But she needed something more. Sharon, moving like a ghost through the corridors of the train, searched the old bar cart for anything that could be used as disinfectant. Her fingers finally wrapped around a dusty bottle of rubbing alcohol tucked behind expired tonic water. When she returned, she met Sally's eyes, and without a word, passed it into her gloved hands. Sally took a deep breath and poured the alcohol onto the gash. Nick jerked violently, a strangled cry ripping from his throat as the fire of sterilization surged through his blood. His eyes rolled back, and for a terrifying moment they all thought he might pass out. But Sally didn't stop. She leaned in, whispering soft words he could barely hear, grounding him in her voice. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached into her pack and pulled out a crumpled paper pouch, tea leaves, tightly wrapped, salvaged from a drawer in the lounge car. She crushed the bag and pressed it into the wound with surgical focus. Sharon watched in awe and horror as Sally reached again, this time for a packet of coarse sea salt she had scavenged. She sprinkled it with care, watching the mixture begin to clot. Then, with Billy's help, she grabbed a length of rope from a broken luggage tie and wrapped a thick cloth around Nick's hip, securing it tight. She tied the knot with a grunt and leaned back, sweat dripping down her face. The bleeding slowed. Nick's breathing steadied. For the first time since the injury, they believed he might survive. On the main train car, where the warm lighting clashed with the cold edge of confrontation, Victor Newman stood like a statue of iron. His eyes, burning with fury and calculation, never left Cain Ashby. They were surrounded by the soft chatter of oblivious passengers, unaware of the powder keg building between the two men. "You're not going anywhere," Victor said flatly, his voice like gravel sliding through steel. "I won't let you twist this story into something it's not with your freakish little robot sidekick." Cain didn't blink. He folded his arms and narrowed his eyes, responding with a tight smile. "I'm not twisting anything. I want the truth." Then, leaning in with venom, he added, and I think you know my son was set up by someone close." Victor tilted his head, the smallest movement, but loaded with contempt. "Your son was set up? Then tell me how your beloved Carter knew there was a bloody knife under the sink in my son's cabin. Explain that." Cain said nothing for a beat. Victor's words had landed. Behind them, Chance stood rigid, his badge peeking from beneath his coat, and his voice carried none of his usual patience. "Detaining Nick against his will is illegal, Cain." His tone was final, heavy. But Cain, always slippery, shot back, "I believe Nick is a danger to others. I had reason to keep him restrained until we could sort this out." Victor growled under his breath. "You're framing him. Just like Carter framed Damien. You're not getting away with it." Cain, almost smug, turned toward Carter, who hovered silently near the end of the aisle. "I pay you to inform me. Keep me updated." He barked the words at Chance as if mistaking him for an employee. Chance bristled, fists clenched. "You don't pay me anything, Cain. But I know who you do pay. And Carter is no assistant. He's a murderer hiding behind your money." The atmosphere was snapping. The lines were no longer blurred. Everyone knew what was at stake: a man's freedom, a family's honor, a legacy built on lies. And through it all, Nick lay bleeding, barely clinging to life, while the real enemy sat comfortably, pretending to seek justice. Carter, as always, remained one step removed. A silent figure lurking in Cain's shadow, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But this time, Victor was watching too. And Victor never forgot a betrayal. Back in the cabin, Nick stirred slightly, his voice a rasp. "Sharon," he whispered, eyes unfocused. Sharon leaned closer, tears in her eyes. "I'm here, Nick. You're safe." He tried to speak again, but the words failed him. Sally pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, her hands now steadier. She had done it. Bought him more time. Maybe enough to make it through the night. Maybe enough to find a real doctor. But even if they did, this wound, this moment, would scar them all. As the train pushed forward through the night, slicing across the hills like a bullet of fate, the war behind its walls continued. Nikki Newman had made her decision. If she had to burn Chancellor to save Nick, she would. But Victor was preparing something else entirely, not surrender, but strategy. And in the coming hours, the fragile truce between allies and enemies would collapse into something far more volatile. Because in the world of the young and the restless, no truth stays buried, no lie stays quiet, and no one ever bleeds without consequence. Would you like the next chapter to explore Victor exposing Carter publicly, Sharon confronting Cain, or perhaps Sally revealing a hidden past connection to someone unexpected? Let me know which thread you'd like expanded and I'll continue the story. The tension in the lodge had thickened into something unbreathable. Secrets clung to the air like frost to glass, and Amanda Sinclair stood tall in the middle of it all, her expression unwavering, her voice sharp. She told Victor that she could do this, that no matter how dark the truth became, she would chase it down to the end. She wasn't just an attorney anymore. She was a witness to deception, a survivor of betrayal, and now, a key to unlocking the puzzle that had left Damien Cain dead, Nick Newman bleeding, and Chancellor Industries on the verge of implosion. Victor gave her a curt nod, but it was Chance who stood closest, his voice low and certain as he turned to face Victor directly. He spoke with clarity, pushing back against the implication that he might be bought. He told Victor he hadn't taken a single cent from Cain, that the only thing he cared about was solving the murder and restoring justice. He had walked too long in shadows, through lost brothers, compromised allies, and political cover-ups, to be swayed by anything less than the truth. He added something else, something that sliced through the quiet like a blade. He told Victor that Carter had confessed during interrogation that he would do anything for Cain. Anything. Which led him to the next question: was Carter shielding Cain from prosecution, or was he the killer himself? Victor's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening like a trap about to spring. Or, he added coldly, he's the one who drove that ancient dagger into Damien's spine. The implications hung in the air like smoke, and neither man spoke for a long moment. Meanwhile, Carter moved alone through the corridor near the beverage alcove, calm on the surface but roiling with conflict beneath. He poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish and nearly jumped when Amanda entered from the west wing. She eyed him with attention that could crack glass. Carter, in a rare moment of transparency, told her about Victor and Chance's interrogation, how they had cornered him, how they looked at him not as a man, but a loaded weapon. Amanda crossed her arms, withholding judgment. She wasn't sure what Carter was anymore. A pawn? A knight? Or the hand that moved the pieces? But before either could continue, Lily Winters entered the lounge. Her presence brought a chill even colder than the wind from the open windows. She looked at Carter like one looks at a rattlesnake, with caution, revulsion, and the certainty that no matter how still it was now, it could strike at any second. Carter approached her gently, offering words about Cain. "You should give him a chance," he said, with the calmness of someone either deluded or desperately loyal. Lily didn't blink. She stared into his face, then whispered, "You make me sick," and turned away, disappearing into the hallway before he could respond. It was a small act, but it cracked something inside him. His mask slipped for just a moment, just enough for Amanda to see it, the tremble, the hesitation. And Cain saw it too as he entered seconds later, his eyes burning with unspoken accusations. Cain dismissed Amanda with a nod, and though hesitant, she stepped out, pausing only once at the door. What followed was a conversation long overdue. Cain looked at Carter with the weight of betrayal sitting heavy on his shoulders. "I know you hid the dagger in Nick's bathroom," he said without hesitation. "You thought you were protecting me. You believed I killed Damien." The silence was heavy. Carter didn't deny it. Not immediately. And Cain continued, his voice cracking now, not from guilt, but confusion. "But there are things that don't add up. Like how my own bottle of bourbon was tampered with. I was drugged, Carter. And the security footage, gone. Only someone who knew every inch of this estate, someone who knew the wiring, the cameras, the entry points, could have done that." He stepped forward now, close enough that Carter's breath caught. "So, I'm asking you not as your boss, not even as your friend, but as a man who needs the truth. Did you kill Damien, for me?" Carter looked down, the glass in his hand now shaking. "I owe you everything," he said, barely above a whisper. "You gave me a life when no one else would. You trusted me." Cain's voice hardened. "That's not what I asked." Carter looked up now, eyes full of torment. And Cain leaned in. "I need you to tell me what happened that night in the maze, from the beginning. Every word. Every movement. Everything." Carter hesitated, then slowly nodded. Neither of them knew that behind the decorative lattice just feet away, hidden by a privacy screen draped in ivy, Victor Newman and Chance Chancellor were listening. They had moved their seconds before Amanda left. They had heard every word. Victor's hand tightened around the edge of the screen, his mind racing with connections. Chance, eyes unblinking, finally saw it. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated plan. Executed by someone close enough to Cain to use his vulnerabilities as cover. And still, the truth was elusive. Because if Carter had done it, Cain was only half right. And if Carter hadn't, then someone else was pulling the strings, someone still hidden. Perhaps Amanda's intuition about the political angle wasn't so far-fetched after all. Perhaps Damien's murder wasn't about jealousy, but blackmail, or corporate control, or buried sins stretching back years. As Carter finally exhaled and began to speak, as he started unraveling the hours leading up to Damien's death, the drugged bourbon, the maze, the argument, the flash of metal, Victor pressed his finger to his lips and locked eyes with Chance. This was it. The moment the darkness began to lift. And just down the corridor, Lily stood in the shadows, unable to walk away, listening too, her heart breaking as she realized that love, real or imagined, had led them all into this inferno. And no matter how the truth emerged, none of them would leave this place whole.